Then we get to oil production. There are two ways in which the energy industry, oil and gas of course, has damaged our environment. One is they pump so much out that there's actually been some subsidence. I say subsidence, but any engineers also always say subsidence. I don't know why, but maybe it's their term of art. I think, anyway. But the more significant impact has come from the fact that they've dredged 10,000 miles of canals and pipelines through the marsh to service that industry. And every inch of those 10,000 miles has, of course, led to saltwater intrusion. Now, I used in one of my op-ed pieces, and I was told by scientists that that was a perfect analogy, that this was a long-term problem that began when the jetties were built, partly with other reasons. But it was a problem, and it's something you were going to have to deal with, but it was kind of like taking a big block of ice out of the freezer and sticking it in your sink, and it begins to melt. But these canals, by the oil industry and by other interests, and believe me, there are a lot of interests that have dug canals besides the oil industry. They're just the largest single contributor. But there are a lot of other ones, including recreation. But those canals and pipelines were like taking an ice pick, and you start pounding away at that block of ice to get it to melt faster. So that's enormously accelerated the erosion of the land and created what was a long-term problem that you might be able to deal with, or at least you had some time to deal with it. That and the loss of what sediment remained, because the jetties carry most of the water and most of the sediment out off the continental shelf, but there are other ways sediment can get into the river, so that you don't lose 100% of the sediment, you just lose most of it. So the decline of sediment, which is flow in the river, dramatically altered in 1963 when those Dakota dams were completed. Combined with the oil industry, that's why it's the last 50, 60 years that we've lost this enormously increasing, accelerating amount of land. And I might also point out that the industrial canal is just that. It's a canal. It was dug by people in 1922. The Mississippi River Gulf Outlet is a canal. It was dug by people. The Gulf Intracoastal Waterway is a canal. It's not a natural outlet or a waterway. And what were the levees that flooded, whose collapse flooded the lower Ninth Ward, New Orleans East, and part of St. Bernard? They broke on the industrial canal and the GIWW. So if you did not have these man-made waterways that benefit the rest of the country in a very direct way, New Orleans East, the lower Ninth Ward, and there's actually flooding from the industrial canal overtopping that got on this side of the city as well. Those areas would have been dry in Katrina. The storm surge still would have gotten a lot of St. Bernard Parish. But it's by no means clear that that surge would have reached the Ninth Ward at all. And if it had, it would have been quite a different event. And nor would that have reached New Orleans East, which is north of the GIWW. In You know, the levees along the lakefront were overtopped, but they held. So, you know, the conclusion is, again, the same point I've been pounding home. And I keep, you know, whenever I write an op-ed, I email it to everybody I can think of and ask them, you know, I get these viral emails, as you certainly do, probably much more than I, you know, with all sorts of stuff, you know, most of it right-wing. And I keep thinking, well, why can't somebody send out an email that everybody sends to everybody else titled Things You Don't Know About Katrina, which every time I submit an op-ed, I submit it with that title, but it's never run under that title. I didn't come up with a title for Rising Tide either. I'm not very good at titles. However, I think Things You Still Don't Know About Katrina is actually a pretty decent title. I don't know why anybody is. Now, apparently, you know, it's the only title I've ever cut. I mean, I wrote hundreds of magazine articles before I wrote a book, and I honestly cannot think of a single one that ran under the title that I submitted about. So I'm not clever. Don't get Rising Tide was not my title. The only book that ever came out with my title I don't like is The Great Influenza, but nobody could come out with anything better. And I really don't like it. So, you know, maybe I haven't made it pithy enough or made it, you know, hostile and antagonistic and provocative enough so that people would forward it. But if the country knew the geological facts that producing electricity in North Dakota actually has made us significantly more dangerous, that building a canal for national security that runs across numerous states and connects to the Atlantic has made us not only significantly more vulnerable to hurricanes, but actually directly flooded. There are roughly 25,000 people, a little more, in the lower 9th Ward. And there are, I think, a little over 100,000 people, 115,000, 120,000 people in New Orleans East. They would have been dry, except for that canal. And there are 70,000 people in St. Bernard. Now, a lot of St. Bernard would have been flooded anyway by the surge. But some of it probably wouldn't have been. And it would not have been the same kind of flooding. You would not have seen essentially every home in St. Bernard Parish destroyed. So, you know, that's basically what I have to say. As I said, it's all, pretty much everything I said is johnmbarry.com. Click on the Katrina page. The introduction that Mark just read is there too. If you want to put that in the email, that's fine. Maybe I'll get some more speech invitations that have a higher honorarium attached to it. So Q&A. Okay.